Good evening. It's 9 o'clock. Our special focus tonight, the day after Indian soldiers laid down their lives for India. We ask, what should India's response be? Today, Army sources confirmed to NDTV that there were also at least 45 China casualties. The PM spoke today paying tribute, saying the brave soldiers died fighting to their last breath, adding that India wants peace but can give a fitting reply when provoked. Both the foreign ministers spoke. They've agreed to disengage, but strong statements from both sides, India saying the Chinese action was premeditated. The defense minister meets military chiefs once again today as India's response is being decided. An all-party meeting will now be held on Friday. That's a big question tonight. But of course, our major focus also tonight is paying tribute to the 20 brave soldiers, officers and jawans who laid down their lives fighting for India. India mourns and pays tribute to those brave soldiers. Today also, the Prime Minister at a video conference with chief ministers on the corona pandemic led the way by observing 2-minute silence. However, the Prime Minister also spoke strongly today, saying that we don't want differences to become disputes. India wants peace, but the sacrifice of these soldiers will not go in vain, and that India, when provoked, will give a strong response. He used the words that these soldiers died fighting. Even while they were dying, they were killing enemy soldiers. Also, however, he was questioned by the Congress President Sonia Gandhi, saying, while the soul of the country has been hurt by these deaths, when will the Prime Minister come out with the truth on what's happening with China, how many soldiers died, and how China intruded into Indian territory?
हमने हमेशा ही ये प्रयास किया है कि मतभेद विवाद न बने, डिफरेंसेस डिस्प्यूट्स में न बदले। हम कभी किसी को भी उकसाते नहीं हैं, लेकिन हम अपने देश की अखंडता और संप्रभुता के साथ समझौता भी नहीं करते हैं। जब भी समय आया है, हमने देश की अखंडता और संप्रभुता की रक्षा करने में अपनी शक्ति का प्रदर्शन किया है, अपनी क्षमताओं को साबित किया है। त्याग और तितिक्षा हमारे राष्ट्रीय चरित्र का हिस्सा है, लेकिन साथ ही विक्रम और वीरता भी उतना ही हमारे देश के चरित्र का हिस्सा है। मैं देश को भरोसा दिलाना चाहता हूं, हमारे जवानों का बलिदान व्यर्थ नहीं जाएगा। हमारे लिए भारत की अखंडता और संप्रभुता सर्वोच्च है और इसकी रक्षा करने से हमें कोई भी रोक नहीं सकता। इस बारे में किसी को भी जरा भी भ्रम या संदेह नहीं होना चाहिए। भारत शांति चाहता है, लेकिन भारत उकसाने पर हर हाल में यथोचित जवाब देने में सक्षम है। और हमारे दिवंगत शहीद वीर जवानों के विषय में देश को इस बात का गर्व होगा कि वे मारते मारते मरे हैं।
चीन की सीमा पर हमारे 20 वीर सैनिकों की शहादत ने पूरे देश की अंतरात्मा को हिलाकर रख दिया है। मैं इन सभी बहादुर शहीदों को श्रद्धा के साथ नमन करते हुए दिल की गहराई से श्रद्धांजलि देती हूँ। प्रधानमंत्री को सामने आकर देश को सच्चाई बतानी चाहिए कि चीन ने हमारी सरजमी पर कब्जा कैसे किया और 20 सैनिकों की शहादत क्यों हुई।
Well, let's go across to breaking news coming in right now. Vishnu, apparently military level talks have been inconclusive today.
That's right. So now the very important talks have taken place at the level of Major General in the Galwan region. Our sources are confirming to us that the talks which have taken place are inconclusive and that there has been no disengagement of Chinese forces in that region. So on the one hand, you've got the foreign minister of both countries speaking to each other, but on the ground, no change in the Ladakh situation and talks. And these are very senior level talks at the level of Major General on the ground in Galwan. And that's a very remote area. They have been inconclusive.
Right, Vishnu. So let's just go across, because as you pointed out, Major General level talks have failed. Now, you've got exclusive details on what actually happened on Monday night, and that really that brutal attack, and the Prime Minister just said that they went down fighting, that they killed, and when they went down, unarmed combat. Tell us more about those exclusive details you have.
Well, let's give you a few of those details which took place. Now, what essentially did happen was that there was an Indian patrol which went through that valley, the Galwan Valley, as you can see in that image, to a particular point which is marked out. And that is the point which is called PP14 or Patrol Point 14. That's right on the line of actual control between India and China. And it was over here that there was a tent of the Chinese which they were supposed to have vacated, left as per a prior agreement, but apparently they didn't do so. And when our initial party, which was a small patrol party, confronted a Chinese patrol party which was in the area, remember their positions are very close to that, then there was a skirmish which took place with both sides calling in reinforcements. Now this was on the 15th evening, and then the sides, the numbers got huge. In fact, some of the numbers which I have been told are astounding. To say the least, several hundred soldiers on each side, and these were fisticuffs which took place, there was stone pelting which took place, and there were batons which were used by the Chinese, and we had these as well with nails on them. It was absolutely barbaric. Some of our soldiers actually fell into the Galwan River in some of those areas. The Galwan River, even now in the month of June, is extremely cold. It's not very deep. It's about 6 feet deep. But because of the temperatures late at night, hypothermia became a real issue as an additional cause of injuries for our soldiers. The full-fledged evacuation did take place only in the morning, and subsequently on the 16th of June, those soldiers have been removed to Leh and elsewhere as well. And the mortal remains of those who've been killed in action have also been removed. Now, we have observed Chinese soldiers being evacuated by helicopter and by ambulances in that area, PP14. In fact, we've got further reports as well which give you satellite imagery from yesterday itself, where I will show you newer images of that entire issue. In fact, we can come to that right now. Again, just to give our viewers an idea, that's the Galwan River region. People wouldn't have heard of it, but in 1962, war was waged over here. Now let's move to the second area, and the area of the clash is in that broad area that I pointed out. There's a circle over there. It's right on the line of actual control, and the Chinese build up just a kilometer away from it. If this appears slightly unclear, then let's just try and give you the new satellite images which have emerged. But before that, just another angle. You can see the Shok River on the left, the Galwan River meeting it as you go up the Galwan Valley. That's where the clash has taken place. Now come the images. These are images we've procured from Digital Planets, which are Planet Labs, which are new images which have actually come in. These were of just yesterday of the Chinese build-up. Now if we go to the next one, you'll actually see the Chinese vehicles as well in absolute clarity, and you can see those over there. There are dozens of Chinese vehicles. Now what exactly is this location? Remember the two circles I had showed you earlier on, just about a kilometer from where the clashes took place. So the Chinese soldiers from this area are likely have surged to that confrontation point and battled Indian soldiers over there. But let's keep looking. Chinese ultimately took away their casualties in ambulances as well. They were heli lifted away from that area. So these pictures are important because these pictures are just of yesterday. As I mentioned in the start, 1962, there were clashes over here. So the big question over here, why have the Chinese come in? After 1962 they withdrew, and the answer is very simple. It appears at this stage it's this road. Durbuk in the south, Daulat Beg Oldi in the north, the Galwan River right on the side, and that's the road they didn't want India to access as much as we wanted to, but that road is complete, and that's what they were targeting.
Absolutely, Vishnu. That's really fascinating perspective of why from 1962 we're now seeing the Chinese back here in 2020. But let's go across live now, Vishnu, to Ladakh, where Saurabh Shukla joins us. He's outside the civil hospital where, as we know, so many of India's brave soldiers are still battling with critical injuries, so the army says they're stable. Saurabh, what are you hearing there on the condition of our soldiers?
Absolutely, Sonia. Right now we are near the command hospital of army. Right now we were told that more than 4 or 5 soldiers who were very critical, but now they are stable, we have been told, and there are other soldiers also who are being treated. They got minor injury, Sonia. Before that, in civil hospital, post-mortem of 13 soldiers were conducted, including yesterday they conducted post-mortem of the Colonel Babu, and later Rath laying ceremony happened, which was attended by LG of Ladakh. I have joined by Rigzan, Mr. Rigzan. Mr. Rigzan is a council member of Leh Hill Council, and they've been writing to authorities from last 1 month that it has been happening. Sir, you've been writing and you've been talking about it, and you've been reporting also. Now, what is the sentiment amongst Ladakhi people?
After the casualty that we have seen yesterday, people are really agitated. We have been trying to get some ground realities for the last almost 1 month since this has happened on the border, but we have not been, getting any ground reports since media was not allowed on the border. People are really agitated. So we are on one hand fighting with corona, and corona is also increasing day by day in Ladakh, and on the other hand China is behaving like this. This is really not tolerable.
Last night, from last 15 days, we've been told that there are a lot of troops movement in Ladakh. Tell us more about this, sir.
Yes, we have seen lots of army convoys moving towards the eastern side of Ladakh, and that's why about 2 weeks ago I tried to go to Changtang, and I was not allowed from Changla Top, one of the passes in Ladakh, and we actually wanted to get some ground realities from the ground. There are some border villages like Phoprang and other villages, so we wanted to talk to the people and see what was actually happening, and we knew that something was terribly going wrong. That's why media was not allowed, and there's no connectivity also. Mobile has not been working for about 3 weeks now.
The bordering area, you are saying that mobile networks are not working.
Yes. Yeah.
So Sonia, right now Mr. Rigzin, who is a journalist also and the member of the senior Lake Hill Councillor, and he's saying that they've been telling authorities about it, and there is no mobile network near bordering areas. So they knew that something is wrong, but day before yesterday this incident didn't happen, and Ladakhis are very, very upset and angry as well. Sonia.
Right, Saurabh, thanks so much, as are all Indians tonight. But let's just go across now to our special panel who joins me tonight as we look at what can India's response be. What are India's options as 20 Indian soldiers have died? There's still uncertainty about the condition of other soldiers and exact details. The Army may issue a statement later tonight. But joining me tonight, I'm joined by Lieutenant General Retired S.L. Narasimhan, a member of the National Security Advisory Board. I'm also joined by N. Ram, Director of the Hindu Publishing Group, Shekhar Gupta, founder of The Print, also joined by Andrew P.K. Leung. He's an independent China strategist based in Hong Kong, and also Elisa Ayers joining me, Senior Fellow at the Council for Foreign Relations. Thank you all very much for joining me, and of course Vishnu with me as well. Vishnu.
General Narasimhan, let me come across to you first. Major general level talks in the Galwan Valley have failed. This is what our sources in the army are now telling us. How important were the talks today? Because apparently the Chinese have not moved back at all, despite statements even having been made by the foreign minister.
Thank you, Vishnu, for getting me on this program. The major level talks, not only today, I'm sure yesterday also it was at the local level the talks were taking place. This is a process that we need to see, and if your information is correct that the talks have been incomplete,
inconclusive
again,
is the language used.
Yes, taken up further, and the disengagement process has to be kept continued. Today, you are aware that the foreign ministers had a telephone conversation, and they have put out a statement saying that they'll deal with this responsibly and also maintain peace and tranquility along the border. So, if you keep that spirit, and then you need to probably renew the efforts to get into talks with not only with the Chinese at the local level, the talks at the diplomatic level also need to continue, and then a way should be found to disengage.
So our military commanders, General, are looking for what? What sort of solution are our military commanders looking at? What are we trying to persuade the Chinese there now?
That's what I'm coming to. We should get back to the consensus that was achieved on the 6th of June in the Lieutenant General level talks. It was agreed that the disengagement will be done, and that is the process that we need to get back to.
But General
at least as the initial step.
General Narasimhan, if I could ask you that in your years of course, service and combat, and what we're seeing today with China, I mean, really, the comparison has been to 1962 times in the unprecedented scale of the loss of lives of Indian soldiers. In that sense, surely the situation on 6th June, when there was a so-called consensus on disengagement, is now completely shattered. And the way we also talk to the Chinese today cannot just be about hoping that they will come back, that same disengagement process, when the facts on the ground contradict that so clearly.
You see, it is like this. We need to work on all fronts. Firstly, to jump to a conclusion that probably this disengagement will not work is something that we need to put aside for the time being. Basically, because it has to be a step-by-step process. Firstly, we need to get back to status quo ante. Thereafter, we need to ensure the observation and the surveillance systems on the border are strengthened. The force levels that need to be looked into. These things will come later. At this point in time, we need to get back to status quo ante, and thereafter, then we need to look at the other things. I agree that the casualties have taken place on the 15th night. Our heartfelt condolences to all the martyrs who laid their lives down in the defense of the country, and their efforts should not go waste. They were fighting actually to disengage, to finish that process of disengagement. We should get there first, and thereafter take on the rest of the issues.
Absolutely. I'd just like to get in the rest of my panel also. Mr. N. Ram joining me from Chennai. Sir, how would you see the situation today. We saw those the foreign ministers talking. That's been welcomed. Both sides have said that we have agreed to de-escalate, to disengage, but there's a very different tenor of both the statements of which China has released, which says that blaming Indian frontline troops and our provocation, trying to paint India as the aggressor. India's statement more measured and cautious, but very clear in laying the blame on China and its premeditated actions. Where do you see India going from here?
I think it's not surprising to see these statements, but I'd really like to endorse General Narasimhan's admirable summary of where we are now based on whatever we know. So at this point of time, there are many things we don't know about, but enough is known. And I think we must welcome this conversation, the telephonic conversation between the External Affairs Minister Shankar and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, where it's very clear. The two sides agreed to, I'm quoting from it, to deal fairly with the serious events caused by the conflict in the Galwan Valley, jointly abide by the consensus. That's important. The consensus was reached at the military level meetings of army commanders of the two sides, cool down the situation on the ground, and maintain peace and tranquility in the border areas. And that, I think, is key, because the breakthrough occurred, as Sonia, as you know, in 1988, when Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi visited China and met Deng Xiaoping, and a breakthrough was achieved, and every government since then has followed up. So I think this is a time for being very responsible. I'm not surprised that each side blames the other, but I would like to also express my deep condolences over the death of 20 soldiers and injuries suffered to others. We don't know what the Chinese casualties are, because no authoritative statement has been issued from the other side, whereas the Indian side has issued this. So I wouldn't take, I wouldn't go by any speculation in the press.
Right. So
but I think now the time has come to disengage, and I'm optimistic, cautiously optimistic, that this will be done. You must engage now, as General Narasimhan underlined, at other levels. The military level is very important. We have the mechanisms for that, but also at the diplomatic and I would say political level, at a fairly senior level, diplomatic and political.
I want to bring in Shekhar Gupta on that as well, because Mr. Gupta, really, when you look at, in a sense, hasn't China rewritten those rules that we're talking about in a way? Because when we're looking at the status quo ante, that restore the status quo ante, as we've seen, China has violated that status quo ante in the last months. From April, when you go towards the Pangong area as well, they've entered in 5 areas from April onwards, apparently in response to India building that road. But China has rewritten the status quo ante, and now, in a sense, is still continuing its aggressive stand on this. What do you think this actually, is this a turning point for India, China, in a sense, in terms of that we can't just look at the same options now?
Well, China has chosen to completely alter the status quo. They've said that status quo that existed, in fact, since 1962, which is what they left behind, is no longer acceptable to them. Now, to say that this is mainly or only or primarily because of the road, I don't buy that. That road was built in the course of time, some time back. It's well within Indian territory. They have some objection or some concerns about the side roads that India is now building. So even from that that confluence of Galwan and Shok River, there was a side road being built of about 6.5 kilometers going right up to the LAC. And that is what they are objecting to. But I don't think for tactical things like that, the Chinese would respond like this. The reasons for this have to be political, and the reasons for this have to be strategic. The Chinese are messaging. And what is that messaging? That is what you have to see. If they think that messaging is done, they will genuinely de-escalate. If they think that it's better to stay put and keep this tension level high and keep this uncertainty on the borders, and that suits them, they will do that. Initiative right now is with them. They've broken the law that they signed up on. It's up to them whether they want to resume adhering to it or not. I think they will decide on one of two bases. One, if the cost for them is too much, which right now doesn't seem to be that much. And second, if they think their purpose is achieved. So those are things that you look at. The Chinese are not, this is not some usual day-to-day firing on the LOC with Pakistan on the in Kashmir. And the Chinese bring in forces like this proactively. They come with some objective. Obviously, that objective doesn't look like they want to conquer Leh because they know they are not going to be able to do it. And to make any gains in Ladakh, the cost for them will be humongous. Then it will not be like this ambushing an isolated company somewhere.
No, and I want to bring in, when you're asking that what the Chinese strategy or the game plan is, I'd like to bring in Andrew Leung here joining us from Hong Kong. Mr. Leung, thanks for being on NDTV. But the larger question, because of course we've seen that China's clamped down recently in Hong Kong as well. We've seen what's happening in Taiwan. Now we're seeing China opening this front in Ladakh as well. What do you see as a China watcher as a strategy unfolding here, and the worry about whether this conflict could escalate between, of course, to India and China is something the world is watching as well?
Well, first of all, I like to go back to the to these crashes and now answer the bigger question separately. Now, of course, these are slightly interconnected, but let's go back to these crashes. First of all, according to some reports, the Chinese have also incurred fatalities, almost twice the number on the Indian side. Now, the second point I'd like to highlight is that it is remarkable that in spite of all these border disputes between India and China, for the past 45 years, not a single shot has been fired by on both sides. This suggests that both countries do not want a war, and they have been bending backwards to maintain the kind of stability in spite of all these disagreements, and install mechanisms for dialogue, both on the ground amongst military commanders, but also higher up in the political ladder. Now, as far as this present crash is concerned, I think there are two issues here. It seems to be there's some disagreement, which may have lasted for a long time, on the status of this valley. Whether it has been decided is on the Indian side or on the Chinese side, but at least that there seems to be some dispute. Now, if there is such a dispute, this cannot be resolved by the commanders themselves on the ground or by any military confrontation. It's got to be discussed and ought to be a dialogue and negotiations up the political ladder, if necessary, all the way up to between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi. Now, that's the first point. The second point is that what actually happened on that day, because only a couple of days ago, there was a de-escalation process going on. And then all of a sudden, these crashes happened. Of course, there is a disagreement on what happened amongst those on the ground. But I think that it becomes on both sides to really come to the real crux of the matter, to prevent all this from escalating.
No, and of course,
as to what now, as to what needs to be done, I think the most important thing is to prevent a shot from being fired, because that's very dangerous. Once a hot war happens, it tends to escalate, and then as both countries are nuclear powers, the consequences could be unimaginable, and it's quite uncontrollable. So I think the first of all is maintain calm and have a strict mandate on both sides on their military officers on the ground, so as to prevent any kind of shot from being fired. And then look into what actually happened on that day, and also discuss the bigger issue of the political ladder. Now, the bigger question I'm coming to, I don't think that China is using this as a kind of strategy, because as China is now being rattled with the aftermath of the pandemic, because China is recovering from it, and it is of course suffering from the impact, both economically and geopolitically, because the backlash against China. I think that this is China will be the last nation to really seek another conflict with India. But I think that also
that's why I think perhaps
India
the timing is so puzzling, Mr. Leung. I just want to bring in Lisa Ayers from the Council of Foreign Relations on that, because the world, as I said, is watching Russia. There is meant to be a virtual meeting of the Indian, Chinese and Russian foreign ministers on the corona pandemic on the 23rd. The US being very cautious so far. What's the US view on what's happened on Monday night, and how do you see this? As a turning point in India-China relations, or do you think that the statements coming from both the foreign ministers are encouraging?
Thanks, Sonia. We haven't seen any formal U.S. statement yet on this crisis, so it's hard to gauge exactly where this is inside the U.S. system. I know that many India watchers based in the United States, like myself and others, are very concerned that this does represent a real moment of change and an escalation in the tensions between India and China. Now, obviously, there have been tense relations between India and China on the border issue for decades. That isn't new. But what does seem to be new is this kind of moment of assertion on China's part. I know there are differing stories about what exactly happened, but you put this against the other incidents of Chinese territorial assertiveness in other parts of Asia, and for me, who do I believe? I find the Indian story here persuasive, particularly given these other examples in other parts of Asia. So I think the question now for the United States, obviously, there's not a role for mediation. Neither New Delhi nor Beijing are interested in seeing any kind of mediator. This is something that President Trump tweeted a couple of weeks ago. But there is, I think, a role to appeal for calm, to appeal for countries to abide by their territorial agreements, and for the United States to stand as it has been as a friend to India, particularly on this issue. Remember, in 1962, the United States stood by India.
Right. But I just want to get in General Narasimhan, because that point being made that, not a shot was fired. So in a sense, but the way we are hearing reports right now of batons being used, covered with nails, that 16 of the 20 Indian soldiers died of trauma, 4 fell into the river, the brutality of the attack, and reports of Chinese casualties as well. What does this represent militarily, in a sense that we know, of course, that China is not Pakistan? So we've seen what happened in Balakot. We saw what happened in Myanmar when terrorists crossed the border, and India went across to get the insurgents there. How can India actually respond to this? There is political pressure at home as well, that this can't be seen as just being something handled with talks. What can India actually do militarily? And China is not Pakistan in that sense. How can India actually take them on?
There are 2-3 things that come out very clearly in this. One is, even though it is questionable to say at this point in time that no shots were fired, because casualties have still occurred.
Yes.
The spectrum seems to be varying between pushing and pulling, which was happening earlier, to little short of opening fire. The issue is that the kind of weapons that are being used are actually the ones which are used rather in primitive times. So this is something which is a difference from normal military behavior. Normal military behavior would actually take up positions, carrying out fire, etc., etc. Those kind of things are not happening. Though it is not a very good sign to have these casualties, but if fire was open, you would find the number of casualties would have been rather high. So that is something that has been avoided by this kind of a thing. But again, the tactics need to be changed. Militarily, if you look at it on ground, when you deal with these situations, the tactics need to be changed. A critical analysis of what happened on 15th needs to be done after the things settle down now. And then remedial measures and change in tactics needs to be adopted. That I am sure the army on ground will definitely do that. That is one. Second thing is, there are other options that we need to look at. And those options, I am sure, the Army Headquarters, the Chief of Defence Staff, everybody is looking at it. And there are options available. Though I wouldn't like to come up in the open and say what are those options again. But there are options available which can be put to use to put pressure on China. So those, I'm sure those plans will definitely be worked out in the Army Headquarters and the Armed Forces Headquarters. I'll leave it at that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I agree with you. Of course, there are options that can't be discussed here, and we still don't know, as you said, the full details of that night and actually what the condition is at the moment of soldiers on both sides. We'll wait for more clarity. But N. Ram, if I can go across to both you and Shekhar Gupta, given the kind of political pressure that also builds up with the Prime Minister after Balakot having recast himself in the sense that this is an India which doesn't behave like we did earlier in years of military or diplomatic strategy. What changes now beyond the RSS Swadeshi Jagran Manch asking for boycott of Chinese goods? How realistic are India's options to respond diplomatically and trade tariffs or trade-wise? Ram and then Shekhar, please.
I think that's a knee-jerk response to say that boycott Chinese goods because India-China trade has been built up over the years. But Sonia, if I may take a minute, I fully agree with Mr. Andrew Leung's assessment that this is not part of strategy. There's nothing mysterious about it. The line of actual control is about 3,440 kilometers long, and it's not properly delineated. So these things will happen. So I do not think anything will come of speculating on this being part of strategy, and I think I would underline that point. The only way, as some of us said, or most of us said, is to engage at the military level, diplomatic level, and at a senior political level. Whether you want the foreign minister to deal with it or the prime minister is a matter of detail. But on the opposition, I think the opposition parties have to be very sober. And to accuse the government of cover-up and all that is not justified in the present situation. The government should come out with more detail, and I would expect they'll do that meeting called on Friday. But the Congress especially should not try to, try to do anything chauvinistic at this stage. There's already enough chauvinism in the media, but I think this is a time for everybody to behave as the two foreign ministers agreed, responsibly, fairly, and go by facts. But above all, let's not speculate on some strategic conspiracy that is taking place.
Let me get Shekhar in on that. All this is just China coming into figure 8 and China at Galwan Valley is not part of a strategy. Do you agree with that, Shekhar? And also the fact, of course, that, the Prime Minister's own strongman image may in a sense be something which needs him to, maybe not militarily, but take some tough action after the death of 20 Indian soldiers.
No, I don't think China stirring up action in so many parts of the same frontier in Ladakh is a coincidence. This is not. This frontier has been there since 1962 for 58 years. It doesn't happen just like that. So there is a reason. Now the reason could be Article 370, Amit Shah's boast in Parliament that he said we will get back Aksai Chin even at the cost of our lives. I don't know, but this is not a coincidence, and this is not something that's happening only on the ground. These things don't happen like that, and if they do, they get rectified very quickly. There is certainly a strategic reason behind it, and to try and pretend, at least from my point of view, I, with great humility, disagree with Ram. To try and pretend will be self-delusion. That is one.
Right.
Number two, I agree with Ram. That this is not the time to troll the government or to tease it and say, go do something, show your 56-inch chest. Because remember history. 1962, if you read everything about 1962, you will know that Nehru didn't want to go to war at that point because he knew he wasn't ready to go to war. But he was attacked so much by Ram Manohar Lohia and Vajpayee, etc. in the opposition, but also by the right in his own party, by Morarji Desai, by Govind Ballabh Pant, that he was humiliating into taking a militarily imprudent action. So that is not needed. And the third thing is, I will just say this, that whatever has happened, I was 5 years old when 62 happened. It took almost 5 decades after that to get Indians to start trusting, at least relatively, the Chinese again.
And that's
I don't see this coming back in at least whatever is left of my lifetime. I'd be surprised if it ever comes back as long as a regime like the CCP rules China.
Right. Well, Thanks very much, all of you. As we said, what are India's options? It's all very fluid. The situation is still, full information still emerging. But thank you all very much for joining me with your perspectives on what exactly happened that night when 20 Indian soldiers laid down their lives for India. Thanks for watching. Lots more ahead.